Alrighty, this is chapter 5, which is all about human anatomy and physiology. And this is just a review of this chapter of anatomy and physiology. It's not something that you don't have to know the detail you would normally need to know for, say, anatomy and physiology class. Okay, so you have the objectives and the NACLS competencies, and our overview will start there. So we're going to start right out with a couple of terms that you need to know. The anatomy is the structural composition, okay, and physiology is the function, okay. I always remembered it the way that it says here, that physiology starts with the same sound as function. So physiology is function, anatomy is structure. They go together often as anatomy and physiology, but you should know the difference. Pathology is the science concerned with all aspects of disease. You'll have in your lab, you'll have the if it's not a lab director, you will have a pathologist that's in charge of you. Okay. So we have a bazillion cells and bones and muscles and blood and vessels, and you're going to learn all about that stuff. Okay. So in the human body, we have 5 liters of blood, and this is a really awesome picture. It kind of has a nice visual representation of how much that really is. So in an adult human, this is all the blood that we really have. It's spread out in all the blood vessels and everything. So you can imagine how much less is in a child or an infant. All right, some other terms. We have the anatomic position, which is this picture right here, that guy. It's where you're standing upright with the arms at the side and the eyes and the palms facing forward. Whenever you guys are giving me descriptions, if I'm asking for a definition, you have to remember that it's not just the eyes, it's also the hands that are involved in these anatomic terms. So supine would be facing up, so eyes up and palms up, whereas prone would be eyes down and or palms down. Okay, and you do have another picture right here. And sometimes we'll talk about that in terms of like pronating or supinating the wrist when we're trying to palpate in the AC area. We'll pronate by turning the palm down. Some of you have had me do this where I'll rotate your wrist down or up so that your hand faces in a different direction. It's very important to know these terms. Some other terms to know are the body planes. You have the frontal or coronal plane, the medial plane, which is called the mid-sagittal or sagittal plane. I think I have a picture on the next slide. Here you go. So you have the coronal, the frontal plane right here, in the first one. The second one is the sagittal plane. It's called a mid-sagittal if it cuts it directly, evenly in half. Really, they're the same things. And then transverse would be horizontal. That's really less important for what we do and more important in terms of like when the pathologist is looking at slides and we're looking at pictures of cells and things like that, you'll see like the transverse plane of a blood vessel or something like that. But it is a term that you're expected to understand. Now, this table, and I believe this table is actually copied out of the old edition, but I believe that the page number, page 119, is for the new edition. These directional terms are you need to know these. You need to know all of these kinds of words because this is how you can officially and scientifically speak to anybody about where something is on the body. You know, when we say above and below, that's all kind of relative and it's very subjective, whereas these are very objective terms. They're always going to mean the same thing. So, for instance, one of the ones I know I've talked about in the lab are these two right here, proximal and distal. Proximal meaning nearest the center of the body, origin, or point of attachment. And distal meaning farthest from the center of the body, the origin, or point of attachment. So when we're using that term of phlebotomy, usually we're talking about like where to draw in relation to a bruise or an injury or something like that. So we'll say, if you've got a bruise in the arm, we draw distal to the bruise. So when we're talking about on the arm, we're going to be talking about not so much further from the center of the body, but rather with the point of attachment. And the point of attachment for the arm is going to be the shoulder. So if we're talking about distal, we're going further away from the shoulder, which would be towards the fingers, right? Whereas proximal means closer to the point of attachment, which would be in the direction of the shoulder. So usually we call that up or higher. Whereas distal will say lower or down the arm. So, but I want to start seeing you guys use these terms so that you can sound more official and professional. Medial and lateral are two that you should be very familiar with. External or superficial, as well as internal or deep are two other terms. So those are probably the three pairs that are the most likely to be used in phlebotomy. So do know those. And your book has this picture as well that shows you the directions that you can use to study. And it's basically, it's relative to, all the other parts of the body. So you can read this on your own. All right, so the first thing this chapter talks about are the body cavities. You've got two groups. You've got the dorsal cavities and the ventral cavities, ventral being on the front of the body, dorsal being on the back of the body. Dorsal is really just your cranial and spinal cavities, and the ventral's where pretty much everything else lives. Your thoracic cavity's got your heart and lungs. Your abdominal cavity's got all your other organs, besides those that are in your pelvic cavity, which is your bladder and your reproductive things, as you can see from this picture. Okay, so some more terms that you do need to know. Homeostasis, that's basically where the body's always trying to reach a state of equilibrium. And there is a word in chapter 6 that's going to be a lot like this word, so do pay attention very carefully when we're doing chapter 5 and chapter 6 work. Metabolism, there's actually two different types. You have catabolism and anabolism. One is a destructive process that breaks big things down into smaller things, okay? That's probably what you think of. When you think of metabolism, you think of the chemical reactions. You're probably thinking about eating food and having that food being broken down into smaller and smaller pieces into glucose. That's just one type of metabolism. There's also a constructive process that builds up things. So, the way the body creates a hormone that takes the smaller individual parts and chemicals, and then it puts them all together until it creates this more complex thing. When we're talking about body organization, the smallest basic structure unit is going to be the cell. And then a bunch of cells that work together to form a specific function are going to be tissues, and you have 4 different types. And then when a bunch of tissues get together and function together, we call that an organ. We have 10 different body systems, and we're going to talk about 9 of them in this chapter. The circulatory system is going to be saved for chapter 6, all on its own. All right, so the first body system we're going to discuss is the integumentary system. That is also known as the skin. The skin's primary functions are to protect the body from, bacterial invasions, dehydration on the sun. It helps us with our body temperature. We eliminate waste by sweating. We receive our stimulus from that, everything we touch. It's hot, it's cold, whatever. We also make vitamin D, okay? And if you look in your book, which I don't have a copy of with me right now, on these pages you can look at different disorders and tests, as well as some of the other functions and whatnot of the different parts of each of these systems. So some of the structures that are associated with the skin, you have your exocrine glands, that's your oil and sweat glands, your hair and nails, and of course blood vessels, right? Your skin has several layers. You have the subcutaneous layer at the bottom. That's where the connective and fat tissue connects the skin to the muscles. And then just above that, you have that's the inner layer of the skin. This is where your blood vessels live, which is why we call a capillary puncture a dermal puncture, because we puncture into this layer. And then we have the epidermis, which is the outermost layer. This is the part you can touch. All right, so the next body system we're going to talk about is the muscular system. The muscles give our body the ability to move. Muscles help us maintain our posture, produce heat. When you think about it, you shiver and stuff like that. And obviously muscles play a role in organ function and blood circulation, since some of our organs have muscles, or they really all have muscles, and some of our blood circulates, so our veins don't have so much muscles around them, but our arteries are muscles all around them that pump. Our heart's a pump, it's all a big muscle, so everything is related. As you can see, we would not have a circulatory system if we didn't have a muscular system, for example. So you do need to know the 3 types of muscles. You have smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. Another word for smooth muscle is visceral muscle, and that type of muscle is what's lining our organs and our blood vessels. It's not under voluntary control. Same thing with cardiac muscle, which lines the wall of the heart. We don't really have conscious control of either of these kinds of muscle, whereas skeletal muscle we have voluntary control over. We can choose to raise our arm or kick our foot or twitch our little toe, or maybe, and those attach to bones and help us move. The skeletal system is next, and that also provides support for our body, provides shape. If we didn't have skeletons, then we would just be a big blob of whatever on the floor. We would look very different as human beings, wouldn't we? But the skeletal system also serves two other functions that you may not necessarily think of. That's where we store calcium in our bones, right? You need calcium for strong bones, but your body needs calcium for a lot of other chemical reactions that occur even at a cellular level and to build bones and that kind of thing. And you have to store that somewhere, and it gets stored in our bones. That's why they tell you to have lots of calcium. Another thing that's important is this term you do need to know. It's called hemopoiesis, and that is actually the production of blood cells, which happens in the bone marrow, and that is actually a function of the skeletal system. All right, so the nervous system is next, and you don't need to know all of these little terms, but you do need to know the basic functions. You need to know the structures, the basic structures. You have the neuron, which is the fundamental unit. You do want to know that a dendrite is the branches, the parts that carry the messages to the nerve body, whereas the axons carry messages away. It's a long, thin portion of it. I do believe I have a picture of that on the next slide. Yep, right here. So the branchy looking part is the dendrites. The axon is right here, okay? You have the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and spinal cord, okay? And that is surrounded, it's in the spinal cavity, and it's surrounded by cerebral spinal fluid, which is abbreviated as CSF. We do need to know this. Everything in red and in bold here is stuff that you will be seeing again, either on a test or an assignment, or stuff that you should just be expected to know. When we need to get CSF for testing, you guys have probably heard of it, called a spinal tap. You have a doctor will actually perform what's called a lumbar puncture. So you do want to know the official term and who specifically collects that. And it's really important for us to understand the importance of this kind of specimen, how it's collected, because if we receive a specimen like that in the lab and we don't know what to do with it, would you want to get another spinal tap? Because I know I wouldn't, just because some phlebotomist messed up. So it's important for us to be aware of where this stuff comes from and why it's important. We also have another structural division of the nervous system called the peripheral nervous system, and this is all the other like the rest of the nervous system that isn't the spinal cord and the brain. So you have motor nerves and sensory nerves, okay? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about those, but you can read about that right now. But you do need to know the types, just the basic divisions for as far as our class is concerned. So the next system is called the endocrine system, and this is basically the system that is all about our hormones, okay? So if you start looking at all the different glands that secrete the hormones into this, what I always found interesting when I took anatomy physiology, I was actually already working as a phlebotomist, and half of the tests that come through, they're just named after the hormone that they're testing. So it was really interesting to learn about, for instance, the parathyroid hormone or the thyroid stimulating hormone, and learn about where it came from, what it does, what it influences, and then to see that at work, because I was drawing blood for those tests all the time. So hormones really have an effect on all sorts of different body processes all over the whole body. As you can see, they deal with metabolism, growth, development, reproduction, personality, just everything really. You do want to know a couple of them, such as the pituitary gland, that it's called the master gland, and that it helps control and stimulate other glands. It itself is controlled from the hypothalamus. Most disorders in this system are usually caused by too much or too little secretion. It says a lot of times it's caused by tumors. I'm not sure about that. I haven't seen any other data on that. But, think about your thyroid. If someone's got something wrong with their thyroid, it's either making too much thyroid hormone or too little thyroid hormone. So it's important to understand how these are all very, very related. Oops, too far. Some other examples, we have a BNP, a B-type natriuretic. I can't say that right. Has to do with the heart. You have erythropoietin. That's a hormone that stimulates red blood cell production if oxygens get too low. Pregnancy tests work because of hormones. The HCG Your pineal gland works with sleep, making melatonin to help you sleep. So there's all sorts of different hormones in your body. This is a very small list compared to all the different ones. And what you'll find too when you read about it, I hope, is that one hormone influences other hormones, which influences other aspects of your body. So everything's all very, very interconnected. The next system is the digestive system. Okay, this is where it takes in food and breaks that down so that the body can absorb what it needs from it, and then we also eliminate waste through the digestive system. So we have this continuous pathway that starts here at the mouth, goes all the way down, blah, 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 and comes out through the anus. That's called the gastrointestinal tract. You also see that abbreviated the GI tract. You do need to know that term, but I'm not going to make you like label anything or anything like that, so don't worry about that. All right, so you have all of these accessory organs and structures. The liver and the pancreas are also included in the digestive system because they do participate in the processes that occur here. The reproductive system, you know the functions of that, and you know the structures. And there are different hormones that you might be surprised to find are present in both men and women. But there are different tests that you can look at here, and it's interesting because some of the hormones sort of overlap with the endocrine system, but this is they really do belong in their own because they're specific to the reproductive system. The urinary system is important because it has to do with the kidneys, as you can see here, the bladder, the urethra. So the function of the urinary system is to eliminate waste and filter the blood and regulate our level of body fluids, all right? So you can see a picture right here. And just so you know, not everybody's built perfectly equal with a kidney on each side of, equal spacing and all of that stuff. But all of this stuff here, the functional unit is called a nephron. That's why sometimes you'll hear kidney doctors referred to as a nephrologist. That's another word for that. The kidneys are responsible for producing erythropoietin. We talked about that when we talked about endocrine system, which is a hormone. So you can see right here, that's another thing that's overlapping with another system. We test a lot of urine in the lab, which is why I said the urinary system is pretty important, because how the urinary system is functioning, what's getting filtered out, what's not getting filtered out, can tell a whole lot about our body, which is why urine is like basically the second most common tested body fluid besides blood in the lab. All right, so respiratory system works by basically it delivers oxygen and removes carbon dioxide, right? So there's two terms here that you do need to know. You have external respiration and internal respiration. External respiration is where oxygen from the air enters the bloodstream in the lungs. So we breathe in, and it goes in our lungs, and we get oxygen into our blood, and then we breathe out, and that is where the carbon dioxide leaves the bloodstream, goes into the air. Internal respiration occurs at the cellular level, where the blood goes through wherever it's going to go, and it finds a cell, and the oxygen leaves the bloodstream, enters the cell and into the tissues, and then carbon dioxide from the cells comes into the bloodstream and then is breathed out via external respiration back in the lungs. So you can see there's some pictures in your book about this right here. And I like this bottom picture here too, because it also shows you guys some stuff that we talked about from chapter 10, and you'll see it again in chapter 6 when we talk about capillary blood and the composition of capillary blood. You have your arterial, right, and you have your venule right here, and you can see that this capillary here in the center is a mix of all of that plus the fluid that's coming in from these other cells and everything. So it's kind of a cool picture right there. I like it a lot. But it's actually really showing internal respiration, and this picture on top is showing external respiration. We'll talk more about the acid-base balance and these kinds of things when we talk in chapter 12 about arterial blood gases when we have our guest speaker. But you should read over this section in your book just so you can be familiar with that, so it's familiar when we get to that later chapter. I'm not going to go over all of this. Here's another picture. All right, and I forgot to put a title on this page, but there is a video from your book's website that you guys can look at, and then I have several other resources here, and then here on YouTube there's several videos covering all the different body systems. So if you're looking for more information on those, you're welcome to view those. And if you have any questions, as always, just feel free to send me an email or ask me in class. Enjoy.